One thing we're more effective as a speaker when we have conversations going on, when we're telling stories. And the conversations are part of that story. But if we have conversations going on, we need our audience to believe in that conversation. To believe they're actually sitting there seeing some type of conversation going on. To put our audience in that moment of the conversation. There are different ways to do this, different methods speakers use, and I'm going to be talking about three. Three ways to do dialogue, to do those conversations back and forth. We're telling a story, and something happens and somebody meets somebody in the story. We could just say, I was walking along the other day and somebody said hi to me and I said hi back to them and they said, how are you doing? But that wouldn't be too interesting. So we use a dialogue to make it active, to show what's going on. So I was going the other way and somebody said, hi! And I said, hi! And they said, so how are you doing? And I said, who are you? Dialogue, back and forth. And you notice there I did the full turn. Completely full turn. To show that here's a person on one side and here is a person on the other side. Now the thing about this kind of back and forth turn is that as you do it, you can mess it up and fall over. So for that reason, some speakers don't want to do that type of movement. Instead, they'll do a turn. Not a full turn, but a turn where they just turn their body. So the other day I was walking down the street and somebody said, hi. And I said, hi. I said, how are you? And I said, who are you? Turn back and forth, and although it's not the full turn, you still get the idea somebody is talking to somebody else. So that's a second way to do dialogue. And there are benefits of the full turn, there are benefits of the kind of the back and forth. And there's some still other speakers who like to do things a third way. They don't even want to bother with the back and forth. All they want to do is speak to their audience. We'll talk more about the benefits and some of the issues as we talk about this some more. The idea is very simple. They speak to the audience the whole time. So they'd say something like, I was walking down the street the other day and somebody came up to me and said, hi! And I said to them, hi! And they said, how are you? And I said, who are you? You get the same idea of the back and forth, but there's no attempt to actually physically on stage show what's going on. In fact, the only way you know that there are two different people talking is because some of the clues there are in the way that the dialogue is set up. And I'll talk some more about that also. However you do it, it's very important when you tell stories to have some type of dialogue, some type of back and forth. But speakers differ upon what's the best way to make that happen. And there are three ways we're going to talk about today. One is the full body turn, where you do the back and forth and somebody's on one side, the other side, full body. There's the half turn. And then there's no turn at all. However you do it is up to you. Some people, they like to do the full body turn. Other people, like the half turn, and some other people, as I mentioned, like to just simply look at the audience the whole time. Benefits for some things and issues with some things, and as always, it's a balancing act back and forth. As I said, these are advanced techniques for a more advanced speaker, but as you continue to develop and grow your speaking abilities and you start realizing the effectiveness of stories, sooner or later, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get those stories across when you have dialogue going on. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So one way to get this sense of conversation is to physically turn the body. You get this sense of dialogue back and forth. And a simple one is turn the body like this, then turn the body like that. Or some people do it, they start here, and they actually turn the body all the way around. So it's like you're talking to someone here, and you're talking to someone over here. The challenge of this sort of back and forth of doing the full turn is that you can really trip and fall with your feet. So you want to be careful about that. And that means that usually you may not want to do the full turn unless you're really good at dance steps. The last thing you want to do is go up there and just kind of fall over. That wouldn't be good. You can do a kind of a half turn. You're still sort of facing the audience. So it isn't like this, where you're not facing the audience at all. You're kind of facing the audience, but you're still getting the idea of one person talking and then the other person talking. And it works okay. It can work okay. The thing about doing the full turn is it requires you to be very fast. That's the key. Here, and then back over to here. And you don't want to seem too jerky, but you still want to be smooth at doing it. Something I'm still working on, developing. Haven't got it by any means down yet, but that's the basics of it. And it works very simply. You just start here, and then you start over here, and then you just kind of turn back and forth. But in doing that, in doing any dialogue, including the full turn, you want to make sure that the people can tell who's talking. One of the most important things in dialogue is to be able to tell who's talking and when. So you want to put little clues into your dialogue. You set it up first, you set up what's going on, and then you step into your story. And that's when you do the turning. And it works something like this. The other day I was walking down the street and I bumped into somebody. I had no clue who they were. And they said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi. How are you? Who are you?" It's a very fast turn, but it gets the idea across. First you set things up, saying what's going on, and then you actually go into the situation where you're talking back and forth. And you turn from one side and turn to the other. The benefits of the turn, of course, is that it shows you standing in one place and it shows the other person standing in another place. So you do get that sense of one person talking and the other person talking. There's no question in the audience's mind when somebody else is talking. The thing you want to do is make clear who that else person is. Who's that other person? So you set it up by saying, I was walking down the street. Somebody came up and they said, and I said, and after you set that up, they and I, then people can pretty much get it. Oh, I get it. That's them and that's I. Now, if you don't want to set things up that way, then you can use another technique to help people keep track of who's who. And that is simply to use the person's name. So, my name is Tim, and let's say the other person's name is Bob. You say, again, stepping out of the story, and I was walking down the street, and I met Bob, my friend Bob. Bob said, "Hi, Tim, how are you doing?" I said, "Hey, Bob, been a while. How are things going with you?" "Not so good. I got a few problems." That sort of thing. Then you can talk about Bob's problems and the nature of them and what they were, etc. But the point is established. Here's Bob talking to Tim and Tim talking to Bob. And all the way through you'll say Bob said this and Tim said that. If you can, think about using multi-syllable names. Like it's For instance, instead of Bob, it might be Bobby and Tim. That might make it easier for people to keep track of. This is what you do if you want to use the full turns. These other things are about dialogue in general, but if you're going to use the full turn, that's how it works. The second way to handle conversations and dialogue in your speeches is by doing the half turn. This is where you don't actually turn the body entirely as you did the first time, but you just kind of half turn to one side and half turn to the other. Something to be aware of in any type of dialogue that you're doing is that you have the speaking space and then you also have outside the speaking space. And so it's always this change between when you're doing the dialogue part and then you're simply narrating or telling the story. In the half turn, you simply turn the body halfway. So, say the other day somebody was coming down the street and they saw me and they said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi." They said, "How are you?" And I said, "Who are you?" You still get the idea of someone talking. It's not as visually accurate as the full turn, but the advantage is when you do the turn, of course, if you aren't careful, you can trip, fall over, mess up the rug. So at least with a half turn, you're getting still the back and forth, but you don't have that risk of falling over or damaging yourself. And doing the half turn is important, as with all the turns, is to be quick. You want to have one side, and the other, and then this side, and then that side. Give that sense of quickly going back and forth in a conversation. Now, so far, we've done all the conversations with the same voice. And a little bit of a change. But they can use different types of voices. For instance, you can have somebody speaking in a lower voice and the other person speaks in a higher voice. So, the other day, walking down the street, somebody came up to me and said, "Hi!" And I said, "Hi." He said, "How are you?" And I said, "Who are you?" That way you have not only the back and forth of the voices, you also have the high-pitched voice and then the lower-pitched voice. Because the name of the game in dialogue is always to help the audience keep track of who's talking. Who's talking and who are they talking to and who's responding. It's very easy to get confused when you're going back and forth to kind of lose track of who's talking. So a little bit of a turn, just that much, can help you say, okay, here's one person talking. Oh, now the other person has started talking. If you decide not to use any sort of a turn at all, as we'll talk about a little bit later, there is a challenge. Because now you have to make it very clear when one person is talking and when the other person is talking. Because there are no more visual cues. There's nothing to indicate by what I'm doing that people have actually changed, that they've actually changed in who's talking. But so far we don't have to deal with that. So far all we have to deal with is one person, then the other person. Now in making this change back and forth between one person and the other person, one way to do it is to have a high talk and a lower talk, but you don't even need to change the actual pitch of your voice. If you're good with voices, go ahead. But if not, it's not that important. You could have, for instance, a slower talking person and a faster talking person. So the other day I was walking down the street and somebody said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi." I said, "How are you?" And I said, "Who are you?" So you have somebody talking a little faster, somebody talking a little slower. And again, not as important to do different voices or even talking faster and slower because you can easily tell who's talking. It's not a challenge. The advantage about doing the going from side to side, the half turn, is that you aren't going to trip over yourself, and it's still very easy to tell who's talking. So you don't trip over yourself, you can tell when one person's talking and when the other people are talking. So that's why some people like to do the half turn. A little bit, we'll go into the area of no man's land, of the no turn at all. Finally, as promised, we now go into the no man's land of dialogue in stories, where there's no turning to side, none at all. You speak directly to your audience. And the only way your audience has to tell who's talking is based on a little bit of a side, a little bit of things that you say. And that's the only way for them really to keep track of the dialogue. And it can get very confusing very quickly if you aren't careful. Because it looks like this to your audience. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, I'm just fine. How are things going? Oh, they're going great. Gee, wonderful. How are you doing? Oh, thanks very much. How's work? Oh, work's going fine. Really? I've been having a few problems with work. Really? Well, my work's going great. Oh, yeah, all sorts of problems. Who's having problems with work? Who met who? Even if you think of it as, okay, first person, second person, first, you're lost. You're completely lost at this point. You have no idea who's talking to who, what's going on. Forget about it. That's the sort of risk you take when you speak directly to the audience. That's why those little clues, I said, they said, become very important here. Let's try that again, going back to my original example, using the little signposts of I said, they said. I was walking down the street the other day, and I saw someone coming towards me. They said, hi. And I said, hi. I said, how are you? And I said, who are you? Easier to tell that time. I used the I said, they said, what was going on. And another thing I did that time, which you should do on a regular basis, is I step out of the story space. Give a little bit of background and then step back into the story space. When you're telling your stories, there'll be a place in the stage where you tell those stories. And if you want to say something that's not relevant to the story, you have to step out of that story space. And then you can step back into it. This is very important when you're talking directly to the audience. Because the audience now has to understand, okay, this is part of the dialogue, this is not part of the dialogue. So when you're just going back and forth like this, it's okay. You don't need to step out of the story space. Because the audience can figure when you're looking at them, you're talking to them. And when you're doing this and this, you're in your dialogue. No confusion. But when you're talking directly to the audience, you need to make it really clear. So, the other day, I was out walking down the street and I saw this guy coming towards me. And he said, hi. And I said, hi. And he said, how are you? And I said, who are you? And then if you want, you could go on and say, ever have that happen to you? Somebody's coming down the street toward you, no clue who they are, but they know you, and you don't know them. What do? You hide? Does that work for anybody? Somebody running away and hiding? Do you do that whole thing about, oh, I sort of know your name, and hope that they won't do it? Oh, yeah, hi, how are you? Gee. Do you just fake the whole thing? Yeah, no problem. Hey, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. And how far do you go down the faking until you actually ask them your name? See, that's all told outside of the story space. That way they tell, that's the part talking to the audience, this is the part going on in the story. So important when you're talking directly to the audience, to get that sense of story space. Now, as you get a sense of story space, you can get also a sense of different story spaces. So you might tell a story about running into somebody here. You might tell a story about being in the office somewhere over there. And yet another story somewhere else on the stage. It's all about making sure the audience understands your story. Understands you're talking back and forth to each other in the dialogue, when you're not in the dialogue, and when you're in a completely different story. Have to make all of that clear. The advantage, though, in talking to your audience directly is, unlike in these other two examples, is you're looking at your audience. The problem about this sort of thing is basically you ignore your audience and hope they don't ignore you. This way, looking at them, you've got control of the audience and you know what's going on. When you're doing dialogue, you have many different ways to act it out on stage. And we've talked about several today. One way you can act out dialogue on stage is by using a full turn. That is, face one way as if you're talking to someone, and then you do a complete turn to indicate the other person. The advantage about this is it really looks as if you're talking to two people because each person is facing the same way they would in an actual dialogue, in an actual conversation. Each person is standing the same way. So you stand on this side, you stand on that side, it looks like it. You know, it looks like you're focusing on one person, then you're focusing on the other person. So it has that realistic look about it. Problem about it is when you're doing this, you aren't looking at your audience. So you're basically ignoring your audience and they can do whatever they want. This is okay for a short time, but you don't want to do that too long. If you don't focus on your audience, they sure as heck aren't going to focus on you. To solve this problem, you might want to do a side to side. We have a half turn. Turn this way a bit, turn this way a bit. A disadvantage is it doesn't look anymore like you're actually talking to somebody. It's just you turn one way, you turn the other way. However, you are looking at your audience now. So you're definitely looking at your audience, you're making some sort of connection with your audience. You do a very clear indication of when you're going back and forth in the conversation and when you're just simply talking to the audience. So you get a sense of this, okay, conversation going on, and now conversation over, done. Now I'm just talking to the audience. The advantage is that you're connecting with the audience, and you still get a sense of the back and forth. However, you aren't fully addressing the audience. And if you have a smaller audience, this back and forth thing, you might even miss the people and not be looking at them at all, having the same effect as if you're looking this way. And for that reason, some people like to simply look out at the audience. Look at the audience the whole time and do everything the whole time looking out at the audience. And there are benefits to this. One is that you don't miss that audience contact. You're always connected with that audience. You never miss it. So you dialogue directly to the audience, you talk directly to the audience, you get that interconnection going on. That's very important. A serious disadvantage of this is you have to make it really clear to your audience what's going on. Because your audience will get confused very quickly. So if you start out by saying, "Hi, how are you? Who are you?" Your audience won't know what the heck's going on. They won't know, is this some sort of dialogue? Is this some sort of schizophrenic weird attack? Is this type of a psychological breakdown you're having on stage there? They won't know. So you want to make it really clear when you talk to the audience what's going on. And And that's where you bring in the I said, they said, she said, he said. So you have a sense of how things are going, the back and the forth. You might say, to set things up, you also step out of your story. And then you step back into your story. As mentioned before, when you're looking like this, it's real clear when you're doing dialogue and when you're not. When you're facing the audience, you're not doing dialogue. When you're facing the audience all the time, they need a little bit of a hint as to when you're doing dialogue and when you're not. So if you're facing the audience, you want to use he said, I said, and want to set up your story. So he said, hi, and I said, hi. He said, how are you? And I said, who are you? That's the back and forth in the dialogue, and people can tell because you say I said, and he said, back and forth. Then when you stop saying those things, they'll know then you're done with the dialogue and you're going into your regular speech outside of the story. However you do it, make sure that you make it very clear as to who's talking. If you can't do the full turn of back and forth, maybe somebody talks slowly or somebody talks quickly. Make sure that the dialogue has some type of conflict in it that drives it, pushes it forward. And that's the whole purpose of the back and forth, to generate that conflict. One side, the other side. It's the nature of conflict. There are two sides to the story, and that's what your dialogue is all about. Getting across to the audience both sides of the story to drive the conflict and pull them into your speech.